if you ever need to explain something to somebody else, you really have to understand it. And I think writing in public is maybe the greatest forcing function for that. So the most effective board members I've seen are the ones who ask simplifying questions. That takes
Simple question.
running a business is incredibly complex, right? You think about all the different dimensions that there are, the competitive dynamics, the product, the engineering, the financials, the people management component of it. And there are probably 1 to 2 priorities that really matter for a business. And there's probably 1 or 2 mental models that are useful for some short period of time in managing those priorities. And exceptional board members, I think, are the ones that are able to just focus on those things. Gartner ran a survey, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where they looked at cost of customer acquisition for software companies increased 60% monotonically. Every year, cost of customer acquisition will increase for the industry. There's an inflation, a CAC inflation, that
Right.
is inexorable. And if that's the case, well, a company that has a 5 or a 10% cost of customer acquisition advantage compounded over 7 years will need to raise like half the capital to achieve the same ARR. So one of the lessons I learned is if a customer chooses a vendor, they're probably not switching for 3 years, typically.
Right.
And so, well, if that's the case and you're early in a category, then you want to acquire as many customers as possible. Because if they're not switching for 3 years, even if you have a product that needs a lot of work, the faster that you can grow, the more opportunity you have to influence that user or the buyer, get as much feedback about the product, and shape the ecosystem in the way that's advantageous to you. And so I think there's a very real argument that startups should try to almost grow uneconomically, right? If you look at these coding agents, they're growing uneconomically because just like a social network, they believe that the distribution ultimately will be able to be commercialized. If you're starting a SaaS company today, you have a market that's 5 to 10 times the size that it was 3 years ago.
The SaaS plus
Awesome.
services. Right.
Yeah, right. Awesome. You have incumbents that are, some of them are probably at their weakest point in a very long time. Also awesome. And then the buyers themselves are asking to be educated because they don't know. None of us knows how to use AI. But if you can find a subject matter expert who's figured out a particular new workflow that is really effective, well, you can grow really fast, as demonstrated by many of these companies that are now on trajectories that were unimaginable 5 or 10 years ago.
Welcome, this is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the exacting foundational shifts of scaling up. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at ChargeBee. In this season, we are diving into AI's all-out enterprise embrace and how that's accelerating Second Acts everywhere, reshaping software categories, business models, and teams to meet never-before-seen stakes. Now on to the episode. With dozens of thoughtfully written S1 analysis, rigorous breakdowns of major data, infrastructure, and now AI developments, all published at an insane, near daily frequency since 2010, this week's guest, Tomasz Tunguz, has chronicled SaaS as a devoted historian. As a VC at Redpoint Ventures, where he spent almost 15 years, he backed 9 unicorns, including breakout companies such as Expensify, Looker, and Customer. In 2023, he founded his own firm, Theory Ventures, with a $238 million first fund, fast followed by a second fund at $450 million, announced late last year. In this wide-ranging conversation, we spoke about Thomas's early fascination with venture and its 3 infinite learning curves, the lessons that have made him such a prolific writer, the habits of exceptional board members, why AI is forcing today's startups to take on complex second acts way sooner, his long developing thesis on the importance of go-to-market leverage, why he thinks monetization is a perennial, monumentally difficult challenge, his favorite recent reads including Umberto Eco's Chronicles of a Liquid Society, and much more. Let's dive in.
Tomasz, so excited to have you in Second Acts. Welcome.
Oh, thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me on, Krish.
Thank you. So let me start with something that you had written about. You had recounted recently how walking along a Embarcadero in San Francisco once, you had heard an angel investor talking to a founder and had wished you could do that someday. Can, can you tell us about that early fascination and how that led you to Theory Ventures eventually? And when you walk same paths today, what are the conversations that you find fascinating today?
Yeah, great question. I was walking along the Embarcadero with my wife. We used to live in Soma, which is a neighborhood in San Francisco, and we would walk to the farmers market every weekend. And I remember there was a restaurant there, Palomino, and there was a seed investor or an angel investor talking to a founder, and it blew my mind. I mean, you kind of understand a lot. This I was really new to Silicon Valley, and it kind of blew my mind that it's just these conversations happen everywhere. Right? You go into a restaurant or a coffee shop, and
Mm,
these kinds of conversations are happening all the time. And it also I hadn't been exposed to venture capital before I joined the industry, and so it kind of blew my mind that this was an industry, this was a job, and so that I think created a desire to be in the industry, and here we are like 17, 18 years later with theory, and the I think it's an incredibly wonderful ecosystem that we have, where the other part that is different than I think from a lot of places is people pay it forward, or people just do nice things for each other, and
mm,
they're and I remember getting started with theory. A lot of people who I knew tangentially or just a little bit went out of their way to help me, and I think that's just a very small slice of all the generosity that exists within startup
right.
land.
Wonderful. I share this sentiment as well. For us, the inspiration was Joel Spolsky's Joel on software.com blog. And then
Oh, it
32,
was so good. I remember reading that. It was
one of the best,
phenomenal.
one of the
Yeah,
best, right?
one of the
From
best.
early on in their career, it shaped how we thought about the kind of company we would want to build someday. And we were able to keep the dream alive for like 10 years. But like we used to look forward to reading that every week. And sometimes if it doesn't publish often enough, we were be waiting for the next one to come through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was one of the first. I mean, he wrote a lot about different kind of business strategy and uh, uh, yeah, wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful content.
Right. Yeah. So you also mentioned that you saw two infinite learning curves, right? One was about figuring out how an industry evolves. The other was more an unobvious one, was about helping founders achieve their potential. How do you approach those today, having done this for like now 17, 18 years?
Yeah. So the initial appeal for venture capital was just, I mean, I like you love technology and it moves really fast. So to be in an industry where, in a sense, you're paid to stay on top of it or at the as close to the bleeding edge as you possibly can, I thought was one of the infinite learning curves. I think the second learning curve is as companies go through hyper growth, the business and the people within those businesses change. And to be an effective board member, I think you need to learn and change along with them. And then the third learning curve, which I only discovered much later on, was the industry itself is changing. So it's gone from 8 to 300 billion. There's a huge amount of retail capital that will come into the asset class. And so maybe by 2027 or 2028, it'll be a $500 billion asset class. And so how do you manage a business within an ecosystem that is changing a lot? And anyway, so that's why I think the business of venture capital is an infinite learning or has three infinite learning curves. And with founders, I think we were talking about this internally earlier this week. There's, advice is a tricky thing, right? Because advice is one person's experience generalized, and can if you apply it too broadly, especially when the underlying dynamics of an ecosystem are changing as quickly as they are, it doesn't always work, right? You talk to, I mean, certain leaders and recruiters today of executives, they're looking for a different kind of like the classic sales executive or the classic marketing executive who hasn't thought through how to operate a department within the world of AI is in a challenged place until they can make that transition. And so
Right.
you can't just take what worked 10 years ago and apply it now. So I think the most important thing as a board member is just try to learn all the time and provide a series of different examples or a collection of different experts who themselves are tinkering and who are active.
Right. Beautiful. Like amongst founders, right? We have this chatter about all the time about scaling yourself as a founder with the company, and because the company scales faster than an individual. First time I'm actually hearing that even the VCs actually have that. Like, is it like a common conversation that happens amongst VCs to say like about scaling with the company? Like, this is first time I'm hearing that. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
well, I think I mean I think that's the purpose of a board. Is to figure
So,
out, okay, what does the company need now, and who do we have in our collective, who is within our collective networks that might have a perspective here. How do we identify the rate limiting factor, and then and then improve it, right? So yeah, I I think it's a different, the nature of the conversation with founders I think is a little bit different because the pain is so much, it's a daily pain, where
mm,
board meetings might happen 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times a year. Um, so I think the acuteness of it might be a little different, but I think the
right,
sentiment is still there.
right. I have one more question related to it, right? If a board member actually interacts a lot more with the company closely, even in the interest of learning, sometimes it can feel a little disorienting for people. Like, why are you working on my company, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm giving you updates on a regular basis can be a reaction from some people. How do you find a way to then? It requires a certain personality to be able to just be able to work very closely, and then be able to still learn, but while still giving the space to let people operate.
Oh, yeah, we're not operators. I'm not an operator. And so I think it can be dangerous or overbearing. I think if we imagine ourselves in that role, I do think so. The most effective board members I've seen are the ones who ask simplifying questions. That takes
Simple
running a
question.
business is incredibly complex, right? You think about all the different dimensions that there are, the competitive dynamics, the product, the engineering, the financials, the people management component of it. And there are probably 1 to 2 priorities that really matter for a business. And there's probably 1 or 2 mental models that are useful for some short period of time in managing those priorities. And exceptional board members, I think, are the ones that are able to just focus on those things and every once in a while provide a mental model for how to think about it or orient a company or a process. And that's why trying to learn from as many different companies about the way that they work, I think, is an essential part of the job because I mean, it's like Munger, right? Like Poor Charlie's Almanac is just a
Yeah,
collection of
favorite book.
different
Yeah,
frameworks, right? And
yeah.
even Dalio, his principles book is just a collection of different frameworks and
Wow,
all of
you
these.
mentioned it.
Yeah,
I'm
no
still
way. Oh,
learning.
that's awesome. It's somewhere around here. I think it's on my bedside table.
Right.
And so I think the more you can accurate know the underlying frameworks and then accurately map them to the business at the right time, the more effective you can be.
Hmm. And is there a particular mental model that comes to your mind today that you recently talked about with the founder, especially for companies that are making the transition from pre-AA to the kind of changes that are needed, especially the
Yeah, I
high
remember
transformation?
some Mike Volpe, who used to be at Index and is now at Hanabi. I remember he asked this question that I use from time to time now, which is a company product limited or go to market limited? So it's
Beautiful.
a very simple question,
Good one.
right?
Yeah.
And obviously like hugely reductionist, but
Yeah.
it's a really good like, and so
Gets you
for a
thinking.
given company, it gets you thinking like, do I have the right product and my challenge is top of the funnel or my sales effectiveness or marketing and
Yeah.
positioning, or do I need to build something else? And if you have,
Yeah.
those are 2 different modes, probably a pendulum
Yeah.
swinging between the two.
Good. And you don't want to get into the builder's trap. It's not like you'll never stop building more and more things, but it's just that are you getting into a builder's trap and think unless you build it, you will not be able to activate a go-to-market motion to be able to succeed. Like, it's a huge unlock. Like, it's a beautiful question. It's a good one.
Right. And so I would argue like after what GPT 3.5 came out, most companies were product limited.
Hmm. Yes.
even if they had huge go-to-market teams, because now all of a sudden they needed an AI feature or some positioning. And then when that was released, okay, now we're go-to-market limited because now we need to learn how to sell this new product and educate the customers. And then, okay, now you've done that, great. The rest of the competition has caught up. Now we need to go back and innovate again. And so you have this sort of classic pendulum swing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Right. Wonderful. So switching topics about writing. So you are a prolific writer, right? Almost every other day. So Intercom's co-founder, this trainer, once mentioned that you put us all to shame, and I agree. I wholeheartedly agree with him. So you write almost every day and have done so for a decade and a half, which is phenomenal. And what you have published has been incredibly influential for a lot of us. So, in what ways does this discipline show up internally at Theory Ventures? And is there a bit of writing advice that has stuck with you over the years that helps you?
Yeah, great question. So writing force, if you ever need to explain something to somebody else, you really have to understand it. And I think writing in public is maybe the greatest forcing function for that, because you really have to, you really have to be able to communicate in a particular way. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to write all the time. I think it's grounding and it's simplifying. And anyway, I love it, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I think the one piece of advice, especially for business writing. Okay, so when I remember graduating college, and I really wanted to work at McKinsey. Like I desperately wanted to work at McKinsey, and there was this book, or that I had been told by a couple of current McKinsey consultants, that there was this legendary book that was written by one of the founders of McKinsey that every McKinsey consultant reads.
Okay.
And I found a copy on eBay for like $300 or $400. Couldn't afford it at the time, and then I got a job at a startup, and then I went to work at Google. And my manager, a new manager came in. His name was Scott, and he was a PhD in aerospace engineering, and then had worked at McKinsey. And so he taught me a lot of the concepts from this book. And one of them is actually, it's called Situation, Complication, Question and Answer. And it's a form, it's a way of making an argument that is very structured and consistent. And if you read my blog posts, underneath the hood, they're all SCQA, all of them, because
Brilliant.
it naturally sets you up to have a hook. Like, what's yesterday's post? Hold on. So we'll break it down, right? So, maybe we'll take the second order effects of AI, right? So the first sentence, AI revenue will double classic software. So that's a situation. And then that's the situation. The complication is the trend is so large, it's starting to have second order effects. What question does that raise? And then you say, well, where do you see it? Well, the answer is in MongoDB's earnings. And then you do 2 or 3 Q&As and then conclusion, and then you're done. And so it's not that everything is that rote and structured, but anyway, the idea is like it gets you to a so what? Like,
Right.
why are you telling me this, right?
Beautiful. So that makes me remember another framework that we used to have. This is TIPS, which is the Trends, Implication, Possibilities, and Solutions. I don't know if it's derived from somewhere like this, but it's one of those ways in which we would prepare. If you meet someone and if you have to explain this, how would you explain the trend and what is the implication of that? And then what are the possibilities for them? And this is in consulting. And then what are the solutions that are relevant for them?
Oh,
Right.
I need to check that out. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. That I didn't realize that there is a simple framework that you use, but it's brilliant. Right? It's a simple way to think about it, but it actually enables you to be able to structure it. And the more you write, I'm sure you would have figured out your own editorial way to actually make it better and better. It's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
No, of course. Yeah, the other book that I'll put in a plug for, there's a guy named Verlin Klinkenborg, who was the executive editor of the New York Times. And he wrote a book called Several Short Sentences, which is an awesome read because each sentence is on its own line in the book. And yeah, so there are no paragraphs. Every paragraph is a one sentence paragraph. And there are two key lessons from that book. The first is the responsibility of each sentence is to ferry and excite the reader to go to the next one.
Excellent. Like copy blogger
Right.
used to say this, like the purpose of each line is the first line is to make the reader read the next line. Second line.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And then the second point of putting each sentence on each line is to look at the cadence and the rhythm. Because there should be a rhythm to it. It shouldn't all be long sentences. Nobody wants to read that. It shouldn't all be staccato short sentences. Anyway, that's a fun read.
Awesome. So thank you. This is about writing, right? The part I also want to understand from you is you said how you write to think. You also said that how you write to think and figure out what you believe in. And can you tell us about the one of the recent pieces that helped you discover something important about a market you are evaluating or an internal challenge that you're grappling with in today's context?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we're all learning is how to work with AI, and writing about how to work with AI. I mean, I think is one of the things that I didn't realize. I started writing about agents, and then readers started to email me and say, "I don't know what an agent is." Right, and it's hard. Like I was sitting with a relative, we were having lunch, and he asked me, "Can you show me?" What you write all the time about AI. What? Show me. Like I know how to ask questions, but make it do work.
Right.
Like make it work for me. And that blew my mind, right? Like, and I guess, whatever, living in the bubble and all that stuff. But that was one example. And so I've been trying to, in the writing, like every once in a while, I write a piece just for fun. But to show more and more of those workflows in ways that are much more tangible. And I think, in a sense, as leaders of organizations need to do this for their people. We had a dinner with 10 executives, and they were all talking about having demo hours or hackathons or some way of exposing within the organization how different people are using AI. You have one of those 30-minute sessions once a week. It's amazing, the creativity. So that's I think an example of exposing or learning something about the ecosystem.
Brilliant. This is awesome.
Yeah. Do you have a fun AI workflow?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Please.
Do you have an AI workflow that's one of your favorites that you use all the time that just gives you a sense of satisfaction of leverage?
Right now, that's an interesting question. Satisfaction and leverage. Mostly the ones that I use for summarization, the research and summary to help me think through on various topics is the one that I use a lot more. Right?
Yeah.
Especially the one where I can use as a sparring partner to understand newer subjects and then apply that in our context in the business. That's the one where I have a GPT that actually enables me to think better.
Yeah, I agree. Summarization is amazing. The volume of information that you can consume.
Right. And then use it as a thinking partner to say, how do I apply it in this context? And then the comparative dynamics. Then you can actually do a lot more together at the same time. And then it just moves things forward at a pace that I couldn't imagine earlier. That's the one where I find it most productive.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Sorry, that question caught me off guard.
No. I'm trying to keep you on your toes here.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So GTM. So you have spoken a lot about why GTM is perennially harder. So whether it's a core thesis that states that you invest in companies that leverage tech discontinuities into GTM advantages, or the scores of S1 analysis that you have done, you've always had a keen emphasis on emphasizing the outsized gains of figuring out go-to-market. And I would love for you to unpack that thesis and tell us how you come to believe in it so strongly over the years, especially about GTM.
Yeah. Okay. So I had this Belgian professor when I went to grad school, who on the blackboard first day of class, he wrote innovation equals invention plus distribution. And the core idea there was in order to change the world in some way, you need to invent something awesome, and then you need to convince people to buy or use it.
Mm.
You need a combination of the two. If you invent something amazing and don't tell anything about it,
Okay.
good for you, right? But you know, and if you just market vaporware, well, okay, not a whole lot there. So you need a combination of the two. And um, I think being a technologist, or because anyway, starting at my career as an engineer, I always thought it was at least equal 50-50 invention distribution, if not 75% invention, 25% or more. And I read the HBS case studies on Betamax, VHS, and you read the history of like AC, different forms of electrical current, AC versus DC, or early electric cars versus, and you read that lesson enough, and you realize actually distribution a lot of the time is a bigger lever than the technology. Every once in a while, that technology can be so amazing, so compelling. ChatGPT would be an example, right? ChatGPT is a magic moment for many of us. Technology is so amazing that distribution took care of itself, right? But even Google, one of the I think untold stories about Google was they were very aggressive on distribution, like, and they focused a lot on it.
Mm.
And so, uh, anyway, so with that framework, I entered the working world, and one argument, and I don't know if this is broadly true, but I'm starting to wonder if it is the cost of invention, particularly in software, is less and less. Right? Vibe coding or AI should ultimately reduce the
Right.
cost to make a new invention. And so, in that equation, the relative value of distribution increases. The other dynamic here that's really important, Gartner ran a survey, I think 2 or 3 years ago, where they looked at cost of customer acquisition for software companies increased 60% monotonically. Every year, cost of customer acquisition will increase for the industry. There's an inflation, a CAC inflation, that
Right.
is inexorable. And if that's the case, well, a company that has a 5 or a 10% cost of customer acquisition advantage compounded over 7 years will need to raise like half the capital to achieve the same ARR.
Mm.
And so if you can find a company whose technology allows them, or something inside of the company that allows them the 5 or 10% better cost of customer acquisition, they'll be the winner if they can sustain it.
Beautiful. And that advantage could be attained through like any number of ways, which could be a pricing lever or the cost of producing the product, or using that as an advantage to subsidize the product distribution. Any number of these combinations. Is that how you would think about it?
Exactly right. So open source, PLG, sales driven channel,
Right.
PR. I mean, there's so many different social media, brand
Right.
of an individual. So there are a lot of these. Uh, who was it? There's a publicly traded project management company that started advertising on YouTube because there was nobody
Monday.
else.
Monday.
ClickUp. Oh, Monday. It was Monday. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they found an arbitrage opportunity in paid media on YouTube. Well, phenomenal, right? So there's some wedge, there's some angle where there's a cost of customer acquisition advantage that's sustainable. And so imagine you have 5 companies, all raise the same amount of money, all founded at exactly the same time. The one that has that small efficiency gain, it's like a Formula One race or a sailing race. They'll always be at an advantage. And then over time it
Mm.
compounds.
Brilliant, bro. It makes me reflect. I want to go back and then do that homework.
Yeah.
Right. So earlier this week, I spoke to Reforge's Brian Balfour, and he spoke about the rise of a new distribution channel in ChatGPT. How do you see the evolution or decline of some of the past distribution channels coming about over the next couple of years?
I think we made this prediction in 2023 that 50% of consumer search would be AI within 12 months. It took us 18 months to be right. So we're already at a place where classic search is a minority of search
Yes.
broadly. And then in February or January of this year, I wrote, and there was a lot of talk about, you look at HubSpot's traffic falling 70% in a month,
Right.
right? So clearly, all of a sudden, the ways that we're educating ourselves about enterprise software have changed in a pretty meaningful way. And now the question is, okay, well, whenever you have a platform shift, the teams that figure out how to manipulate the new platform to their advantage will win. And this was true with Google search engine optimization. It's true with mobile app store rankings, and it will be true with AI. That part, I think, is now many people are trying to figure this out, and the people who figure it out will have distribution. I mean, Neon, right? 75%, 70 or 75% of the new databases created in the quarter before they were acquired by Databricks were all created from coding agents. So it's not necessarily that all of this discovery for enterprise software will happen through the dot-coms, right? The web pages or the mobile apps. Much of it might just happen through agents. And so now,
Mm.
great. If that's the premise, well, what kinds of content and which formats need to exist where to be able to supply agents the information
Right.
to choose my product? That's all new.
Right. Like a MCP server question, right, from a cursor, actually picking the right tool could become a distribution channel, right?
Exactly
And
right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what happened, right? Like, I think Lovable or another,
cursor or anybody. Yeah.
yeah, was picking Neon as a Postgres instance. Like, great.
Right.
All of those user accounts are then created that way and funneled that way.
Yeah. And when you are evaluating a business, how differently are you assessing the question of, do we believe this company can create a market? Especially every time I think about create a market, I just couldn't help keep thinking about Shopify, right? And then like that's a dream for everybody. Like, so how do you assess this today?
Yeah, category creation is fun, right? It's fun in that people want to learn about new categories. There's we're going back to the first set of questions. There's a natural curiosity uh, that people have, and people want to stay on top of the next thing, either build a resume, find the next job, get promoted. And I think ultimately all enterprise software boils down to selling a promotion. So I think category creation is one of those. It's really hard to do, and it's incredibly expensive compared to, say, rip and replace or an evolution of an existing category. One, because there is no budget line item in many organizations' budgets. And so a company needs to have sufficient marketing and sales dollars to be able to convince some meaningful fraction of buyers that they ought to have a budget. And that means often championing an unloved role within the organization. I think about like Nick Mehta at Gainsight. Customer account management was an unloved part of the organization. And his first few events, they were not about the product. They were about explaining why this role matters, the customer
Right.
success role matters,
Right.
and highlighting key members of that community and celebrating their success because it was the best venue to do that for all of those people. And then as a result, the brand and the company became beloved within that community and it grew. I think that's a lot of category creation is being um, a champion for that persona.
Right. And in the previous era, when like of the play bigger playbook, right? The when we would think about it through the lens of an individual or a department, a function that needs to exist. I wonder how this will actually evolve now with more roles getting smashed together as people. It is going to be even more fascinating to think about the kind of categories that you would imagine, not through the lens of humans and individuals, because it's not a singular title, but you're going to have like more T-shaped people um, who will do these jobs. It's going to be more interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I think we're in this wave where people are reinventing their workflows, and as a result, leaders are preferring generalists over specialists because many of the specialized roles have some fraction of them that can be automated. And then at some point, we will find the new best way to do different things. and then we'll return back to specialization, and we'll go from vibe coding different internal tools to that reimagine these workflows to buying something that's off the shelf.
Yeah. Yeah. The hardest part is going to be like whichever problem that you pick, right? Solving that with the initial understanding is very different from how many tools can you actually develop subject matter expertise on and continue to maintain it, improve it. Is going to be the hard part.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Wonderful. So this my favorite topic, pricing. So in 2015, you wrote about 5 common SaaS pricing mistakes, right? And in a more recent comprehensive guide on pricing strategy, you list those mistakes as is. Why do you think they have persisted? And how they have gotten more critical when applied to monetizing AI capabilities and all the emerging pricing models? I was very surprised to see that many of these mistakes have continued persisting, and I'm not surprised. Would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, pricing is one of those. It's a perennial, right? It's like the stock market in the sense where it changes all the time and it changes every day and it changes as a result of macroeconomic conditions, right? You have first the global financial crisis or the flash crash of 2016 or the temporary recession caused by COVID. All of those things all of a sudden change the nature of pricing because you have this dynamic relationship between the buyer and the seller. And the seller is always trying to figure out, okay, what is the optimal pricing strategy while the buyer's preferences are changing. And the buyer's preferences are changing as a function of the market. So it feels really dynamic in that sense. In addition, the pricing power of the vendor also changes. A vendor who's a leader in the category, Warren Buffett would argue, should have pricing power that's sustainable. It's probably the only moat. And so it's really dynamic. And then you have the industry itself. We move from like usage-based pricing or seat-based pricing to Slack introduced active seats. Expensify also had it.
Fair pricing.
And then, yeah. And then, so that was a change. And then now there's usage-based pricing and the component. What is the functional unit of pricing that you start with? Like, is it a server? Is it a core? Is it a credit? And so we've gone through quite a lot of innovation in 15 years in terms of how we price and how we model pricing. So that's why I think it's all experiments at the end of the day and trying to figure out, okay, given what's happening in the market and particularly with this competitive dynamics and the strength of the product, it's always in flux.
Right. It's very interesting. And the the art form of pricing still hasn't changed, right? The fifth mistake that you mentioned, I believe, is about the art of, I think, the wrong price discovery questions, which I think remains the same because many a times, as you rightly mentioned, it's about like picking stock market based on your limited understanding of picking a stock. Anybody can pick a stock, but actually, is it really that thorough? And based on like various aspects, I think that's the hardest part.
It is the hardest part. Yeah, you nailed it.
So the distinctive margin profiles, especially of AI, it has been a hot subject lately, and you've addressed that when reflecting on debates that have been around the AI coding space. And you wrote that the companies that will master penetration to maximization transition of monetization will define the next decade of software. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think there's been a lot written about the margin structure of coding agents, and some of them might be negative and negative gross margin business, kind of tough business to be in. I think the reality is around a lot of these AI businesses, we have built very rudimentary machines that there's tiny amounts of optimization. So let me make this more concrete. 100 years ago, I mean, the average miles per gallon of an electrical engine, of a combustion engine, was terrible. I don't know, 1, 2. And today we're able to generate, I don't know, 24 to 48, depending on whether or not you have a hybrid. So we've had a 10x improvement in efficiency. And the same thing is true in AI. So Microsoft, I think at the last quarterly announcement, said they were generating 90% more tokens per GPU hour than they did 12 months ago. Pretty good, right? Doubling in productivity for the same amount of electricity, doubling in the amount of work for the same amount of electricity. And so if that's the case, and we're riding this cost curve that's 100% per year or better, then going back to the equation about invention, innovation, and distribution, what you really care about is just distribution. Can you capture as much distribution as possible? And then as the underlying systems become more and more efficient, and they can become efficient in many different ways, right? The models themselves, there's local models, there's caching, lots of different techniques. There's a new technique called flash attention that just came out of Stanford that's materially improving underlying AI performance. And there are so many brilliant people that are working on figuring out novel optimizations for these architectures that it's a very safe bet that the underlying profitability of this business should improve pretty meaningfully.
Got it. And so Thomas, help me understand this part, right? Which is how do you make that? I'm trying to understand the connection between this, the maximization of the maximization transition of monetization and the penetration, right? I'm trying to understand this a little bit more in layman terms. If the cost is actually going down, you're saying, can you talk a little bit more about how to think about distribution a little differently? Meaning, especially people who are building application
Yeah, I
layer
mean,
on top of this. How should they think about this?
right. I mean, so one of the lessons I learned is if a customer chooses a vendor, they're probably not switching for 3 years, typically.
Right.
And so, well, if that's the case and you're early in a category, then you want to acquire as many customers as possible. Because if they're not switching for 3 years, even if you have a product that needs a lot of work, the faster that you can grow, the more opportunity you have to influence that user or the buyer, get as much feedback about the product, and shape the ecosystem in the way that's advantageous to you. And so I think there's a very real argument that startups should try to almost grow uneconomically, right? If you look at these coding agents, they're growing uneconomically because just like a social network, they believe that the distribution ultimately will be able to be commercialized. Like a social network, right? I mean, I don't know how much money, I don't know how many users Facebook had before they commercialized, but well over 100 million. Google, same thing. Lots of distribution with search before they added the monetization model. Same is true for open source software. If you think about open source software, broad number of GitHub stars, thousands and thousands. MongoDB would be a great example, or HashiCorp would be another, where there are lots of people using these open source projects before there's ever commercialization. And we can make an argument that, especially for bottoms up software companies, the same strategy should work well, where you can subsidize growth and get to a massive, build a brand, which itself is a defensible asset, but get the distribution, then have economies of scale, and then figure out the underlying monetization. As long as you can raise the capital to subsidize the growth, viable strategy.
And is there a particular metric or something like, see, we used to the churn rate, then the LTV, even if however you approximate it, used to be like used as a way to approximate that, okay, you can have like these many years of LTV as a way to actually think about that. And today with a high churn, especially when like people are trying out products, do you see this changing, or how, like, is there a particular
Yeah,
metric
LTV
that
is
people are
really
willing to
tough.
use? Yeah.
LTV is really tough.
Especially when, like, we are not talking about 3 years. Like, if it is B2B SaaS type of product, yes, especially if it requires implementation. But if it a lot of products that people are willing to try and churn out too soon, do you see any other metric that actually people are paying attention to or should pay attention to that helps?
No,
Right.
I think it's qualitative.
Quality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you need to have a view on how the strategic landscape evolves because it's very unlikely to see the data. I mean, so one way of characterizing it is as an investor 5 years ago, if you were valuing a company that was say at 10 million in ARR, well, you probably had 3 years of longitudinal data on customer retention, gross dollar retention, net dollar retention, account expansion, all those things.
Right.
Today, a company at 10 million in ARR might be 6 months old. And so,
Right. It's a usage multiplied is how it's actually,
right. And so
computed.
your longitudinal data,
Yeah. There is no basis to actually be able to extrapolate that and make that type of decision making. But you
so
wait too long, then you lose out on the advantage.
right.
So
And so you cannot, I mean, you can get some sense, but very, very um, lossy or inaccurate way of evaluating it. So you need to evaluate in a different way.
right. And it's still it's evolving really fast. Thank you. Thanks for indulging me in that.
No. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I loved your note describing Monte Carlo's daily revenue model, right? And I want to print that out like for our team. And I'm reading it in full here. Pricing reflects your entire GTM philosophy and commitment to customer value. It's a dare few take so comprehensively, but the rewards in alignment and customer centricity are immense. I loved like exploring more about Monte Carlo's daily revenue model. So, what about their strategy shift made you say that? It'll be very educational to get your view on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Monte Carlo, lucky enough to work with Barsh, a phenomenal leader. And we had been pricing not on a usage-based pricing model, basically ELA, all you can eat accounts or something similar to it. And then one quarter, the company leadership decided we should move to usage-based pricing. And they went and explored. They talked to the leaders of many usage-based pricing companies, large cloud data warehouses and others. And they decided to, move to a model of daily revenue. And it's been fascinating to watch because overnight at the next board meeting, none of the classic metrics that I was accustomed to for a long period of time were in the board deck. There was no concept of ARR. There was no concept of MRR. The sales quotas are completely different. And instead, they were replaced with this metric of daily revenue. And it felt like watching the ticker of a stock. And on this day, a share of, I don't know, Apple is worth this, and it goes up and it goes down. And so on an individual account basis, and so for each,
it's a
and
DAU kind of a metric, daily
that's
active
daily
users.
revenue.
Yeah, daily revenue, right?
And if you're an AE, if you're an account executive, you log in and it's like a Fidelity dashboard. You see the performance of this account, the performance of that account, performance of this account, and you have a certain goal to drive performance. And there are actions that you can take. Obviously, you engage a customer, you can try to cross-sell them, professional services, marketing events, and all those kinds of things. And this happens at an individual AE level, and then it's aggregated all the way up to the company level. And the whole company runs. Bar has a dashboard that tells her this is how much revenue I made yesterday, the company made yesterday. And that cascades through the entire organization. Because now if everyone is gold on daily revenue, well, the metrics have to change, customer success is changing, quotas have to change, the marketing has to change. And that's a pretty fundamental transformation.
Have you seen anyone like willing to actually like make this type of transition, or have you recommended it to anybody to make this type of transition based on this?
I think, well, more and more companies are now default usage based, and the notion of like RPOs. So I think for a company to make this transition at scale, it needed to be a company that was started before 2020. It is rare. I mean, I don't know of another example of a company that's moved to daily revenue, but the migration to usage-based revenue is
Yes,
more common.
that is not. Yeah, more common. Yeah, these transitions are hard, right? And that brings us to the second acts that are needed, right, today in SaaS.
That's right.
So we'll go back to 2014, right? You analyzed 41 publicly traded SaaS companies and concluded that there had never been a better time to start a SaaS business. Obviously, yeah, it's fantastic. And a few months ago, you spoke about how if more and more companies do what Klarna has been chasing and attempting, which is doing away with systems of record, and you mentioned about building internal systems, um, that has dominated the last SaaS wave. The market for enterprise software could be upended with a fundamentally different architecture. Can you talk about what you refer to as the architecture? And in 2025, is it still the best time to build a SaaS business, although for different reasons? And what are some metrics that manifest those new reasons that you look at as a VC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting time. So, one way of characterizing it is about $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion worth of SaaS market cap that we've created in the last 20 years, let's say, since the Salesforce IPO. And all of those are that market cap is created around a series of workflows that are now suddenly being reinvented. How does an SDR manage an inbox? How does an SDR engage an account? How does a software engineer write code? And so there's $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion worth of market cap that's loose. And the other part of it is that AI is, I mean, it's doing work in a very real way. And so the market opportunity for AI software is now 5 to 10 times the size. But why is that? Well, most companies spend, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5% of their revenue on software, but they spend 30 to 70% of their revenue on people. And so if you can capture some of that labor spend, well, then you can increase the total market size by multiples.
Right.
And so, okay, if you're starting a SaaS company today, you have a market that's 5 to 10 times the size that it was 3 years ago.
The SaaS plus
Awesome.
services. Right.
Yeah, right. Awesome. You have incumbents that are, some of them are probably at their weakest point in a very long time. Also awesome. And then the buyers themselves are asking to be educated because they don't know, none of us knows how to use AI. But if you can find a subject matter expert who's figured out a particular new workflow that is really effective, well, you can grow really fast, as demonstrated by many of these companies that are now on trajectories that were unimaginable 5 or 10 years ago. So I think it's a phenomenal. Plus, you have the venture capital funding environment that's there and supportive.
Right. Brilliant. And I want to also reflect on the particular learnings with respect to Looker. So there is this fascinating sentence in your post about Looker's extreme PMF that spanned multiple product lines, sold across multiple geographies, across verticals and segments with different go-to-market motions. And you have written, the quote is 150 permutations of closing an account. The combinometrics of PMF explode quickly. That's why sustaining it with scale becomes harder and harder. Today, all those second acts are being forced way early because of AI, right? We see companies that are selling self-serve and also selling to enterprises, right? Large multi-year deals. And especially when the churn is much lower, when you sell annual contracts with the customers who have explored and are like having a high conviction. So the timelines are compressed for startups and incumbents. And it has never been about figuring out like one thing: product distribution, pricing leverage. Everything needs to align at once is what it feels like. So when you look at scale pre-AA companies, right, the pre-AA companies across public and private markets, what are some examples where you feel they have successfully layered the next act S curves with AI? And especially, I'm very curious about when I read about the Looker and these 150 permutations, it felt like they have been dealing with this level of complexity much earlier, very deliberately, by getting into that level of complexity, like voluntarily walking into that type of complexity. And I felt that there may be like very interesting learnings for people who are dealing with this level of complexity across all multiple areas at the same time. So would love to hear a perspective on this, Thomas.
Yeah. So Teen, who used to be at Salesforce and was the founder of a company, he kind of talked about how there are these different levels of scale. So there's when you start a company and you go from 1 to 7 and you have a collection of people, that's one level of complexity. Then you add your first level of management, typically happens at 7 employees. And then the company grows again till it's about 40 people. and then there's another level of management, and then it gets to about 150. And that all has to do with the span of control and how many people can report to a single manager, and the relationship work.
Right.
And so there's that whole part of complexity, which I think is incredibly hard to do well. At the same time, when you're scaling a company, particularly across multiple geographies and languages and time zones, you add a huge amount of complexity. And so product market fit is basically the grease that allows an organization to continue to sell and grow while dealing with iterating through the friction of building the underlying machine. And yeah, I mean, Looker, we had, I think, 26 consecutive quarters of beating plan before we sold. So never
Wow.
missed a quarter. And so the team there, Floyd and Frank and Ben, they just did a phenomenal job of understanding how to build that machine, right? And I think that mental model, going back to mental models, that mental model of what machine is it that we're building and how do we make it as efficient as possible, as quickly as possible, is really useful.
Brilliant. And the layers to the segmentation that you're referring to, right? And you made it sound like there was this beautiful line that you just mentioned, which is PMF is a grease that makes the friction go away, right? And I feel like there is I can imagine the like so much detail behind it. Would love for you to expand a little bit more, because what you like find as a product market fit in one segment and sells very easily with the pricing as a combination of product and your pricing leverage, let's say, for that segment may not work in another segment. Was there a particular deliberateness to actually like taking time to continuously find PMF in various segments to be able to layer these together, especially over a 26 quarter is just phenomenal. Was there like a parallel exercise to continuously do this that made it happen?
There was. Yeah, so I think PMF is also often talked about as a binary, but it's not. It's a continuous thing, um, because um, because the market is changing, the products are changing. And so, I mean, one of the great things that Frank did, who's the CEO of Looker, each year had a theme in the business's life. And there was one year where company was tens of millions of ARR. And he called it the year of Looker 500. And the idea was we need to prepare the company and the product to be sold to organizations of 500 people or more. So we had product market fit in one segment, and he was saying, now we need to establish product market fit in a different segment where the product needs are different. We need to have more sophisticated user menus, or the product needs to be able to handle 500 concurrent users. The scale issues, the sales process needs to change because implementations are more complex. And so it's not binary. It's a constant treadmill is not the right word, but a constant evolution of product market fit.
Right. And we had the luxury, like, so that is very relatable because we went from selling to SMBs to enterprises over a 5 to 7 year period, with every year changing the segmentation definition and moving up market. And like I feel like the moving up market, there was this luxury of deliberately moving up market every year with product catching up, like, and then supported by go to market, and you can have one lead, then the other one follow. And then also you figure out pricing and sales incentives and having the right people on the seat to be able to go into certain segments. Do you feel like that luxury doesn't exist, like that luxury of time to actually selling into multiple segments doesn't exist for many of these companies today? And do you see a different act that is needed within these companies to like do it faster, better?
Well, I think the startups are taking on complexity much earlier on. One
Yeah.
great manifestation of this is the maturity of a company before they sell internationally.
Right.
So rule of thumb used to be 5 to 10 million in AR before you have an AE in Europe. Today, maybe you're a million in AR before you have your first account in Europe. Um,
Right.
and so and then you have what Parker Conrad calls compound startups, right? These startups where you have many different products right out of the gate. And so I think as founders and leaders of organizations have become better students of previous businesses, they're willing to take on more complexity earlier on within an organization and do it successfully. It's just like you look at running times, right? The record for the 100-meter dash,
Right.
it'll just
Or
continue to go down. There's no plateau. And so whatever the older sibling is doing, the younger one will do sooner. And so it's perpetual, which is it makes it fun.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you. Favorite topic, books? Last question. And there is a curious, unusual book of essays on your list of favorite books from 2024, right? The one that we noted was Umberto Eco's Chronicles of a Liquid Society. Tell us about it and what has been a favorite so far in 2025.
Yeah, for sure. So Umberto Eco, he was often called the most intelligent man of his generation. And so he had this library of 10,000 books, and somebody asked him, have you read all of these? And he said, no, library is only valuable for the number of books in it that you have not read. Yeah, so he's an absolutely brilliant guy. And if you ever want to learn much deeper English vocabulary, I think you need a Kindle to read his books often, because he knows words or writes words that I've never seen anywhere else, but clearly exist. So he's brilliant. And he had this weekly column in this Italian periodical where he was a technology curmudgeon, and he did a really funny way. And it's nice to hear a foil. He also wrote some great books. There's In the Name of the Rose, which was a murder mystery about in a monastery, and then Foucault's Pendulum, which is awesome. Anyway, so Baudolino is another one that's great. So I really love his writing. He has this sort of magical realism of like a Gabriel Garcia Marquez or others. But my favorite book, right now I'm reading this new book on China, and let me just pull up the title because it's phenomenal. It's called Breakneck by Dan Wang, and it's interesting. He has a history of going between the West and the East. Goes to Yale Law School and then ultimately ends up working in China. And I'm about halfway through it. He characterizes, going back to mental models, he characterizes China as a nation of engineers. Almost the entirety of the Chinese political apparatus are engineers of some form or another. And he characterizes the US as a nation of lawyers, because almost the entirety of US government are lawyers. And it was not always the case. After the Second World War, the US built a tremendous amount of infrastructure. And then in the 1970s, many things changed. And so it's just really interesting to hear these he's clearly a very educated guy, and he's lived in both ecosystems, and to hear him contrast it in a very approachable way. The other thing that he said that I thought was fascinating is he said the Chinese Communist Party espouses Marxist dogma, but acts like much more right than you would think. They're far more free markets and market driven than they are sort of the core of the Marxist principles.
Like a more capitalistic in their. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, they're just building, right? The biggest bridges, the most amount of real estate, and the dominant way of growing the country is through the construction and the manufacturing and the engineering and the production. And that's very different than I think what Marx has in mind. And I think that's part of the back half of the book. But I think it's just a fascinating view into what will be a critical relationship here for a long time.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This was a fun conversation. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your time. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Thanks for putting together the outline. And yeah, great to spend time with you.